if you didn't know, Tower of God has reached 500 chapters. That is already a round of applause. And we're here with one of the AOA boys, the Apostles of Anime, Isaiah, to talk about our love of Tower of God. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I just want to thank you for having me. It's been really cool. I've seen some of your videos. It's cool to finally sit down and talk with Tower of God about yet another Tower of God YouTuber.
And you know, I wish people heard the conversation we were talking about prior to this, because that's the real juicy stuff. I just love knowing about content creators, and you know, I'm sure when we're both done talking here, you know, you can talk to your other members and just be like, you know, that DJ Miles guy, he's not too bad, or he thinks the way that I think. But to bring it back to Tower of God, let's just go ahead and talk about chapter 500. So I know a lot of mangaka out there, right? And I think about Oda immediately with One Piece. You know, One Piece, I think, is like 1,000+ chapters in. But I remember for chapter 1,000, he did something to really make Luffy, the protagonist, stand out, to be like, yo, chapter 1,000 was serious. Chapter 1,000 was a celebration of the entire series. And it shows why, you know, Luffy is the best. So if we can bring it back to Tower of God, did you feel like when you read chapter 500 of Tower of God, like, whoa, like, Bomb means serious business, or like, yep, what a stamp to end Tower of God 500? Or did it feel like, okay, he didn't really do anything with 500?
I think, like, specifically chapter 500, it wasn't, I don't know if SIU went out of his way to be like, hey guys, chapter 500 is going to be really crazy because we've hit 500 chapters. I think, like, overall, just the way that the narrative is structured here, the actual 500th chapter had to just be another chapter in the ladder, so to speak. Because I think, you know, SIU does this thing where he very much is playing the long game here, right? He doesn't, everything is really stretched out, and everything is sort of about planting breadcrumbs on the floor piece by piece, and up until you get to chapter, you know, 512, and then all of a sudden that thing in the 500 chapter that got mentioned, it's like, oh shit, that actually, you know, that pays off here, and so on and so forth. But I think it was, for me, it wasn't, I don't think chapter 500 specifically really stood out to me much more than the sheer fact that I was like, wow, we're 500 chapters into this. You know what I mean?
No, I agree. You know, I don't know why I thought, maybe, again, horrible comparison with One Piece, because I think celebrating 1,000 chapters into any series is probably going to get some sort of love, or maybe the mangaka author might, like, really focus into it. Yeah, you're right. I read chapter 500, and maybe that's more so my fault, that I'm like, yo, 500 SIU is gonna go crazy. And I read it and I'm like, well, it's a good chapter, but for people who saw my reactions, they saw me complaining more about the chapter itself. And that leads me into what I wanted to ask you. Tower of God is known for the games. You know, one of the things that I loved about Tower of God, just in general, was that every floor there's a new game, and you know, but it's always life or death. And you know, some characters, they chill at the 20th floor, you know, and they're living the good life, or they're the more ambitious people continuing the chapter, or continuing the tower, the struggle, right? So the cat tower, there's so many moving chess pieces, right? You got Yasratcha, you got Kallavan, you got, you know, Bomb trying to save his master, you got these Yasratcha's feline commander's backstories. We're kind of all over the place. And in chapter 500, we get this moment where, again, I love seeing my wife Kaiser, you know, and I love seeing Rock, and I love seeing, you know, Hockney. But man, they spent most of this chapter, or a good chunk of it, with this crab guy, which I don't care about, setting up this game, which I'm about the game, but there's a good portion where you're like, okay, we got the red fish, we got the orange fish, and we got the blue fish, and we got these we got these different shapes and blah blah blah. And I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, seems easy enough. And then SIU just had to go a bit further with the exposition dump of like, oh, but they also change in values, and then they also decrease. Oh, and then there's these coins, and then these coins are a different type of tier, and then you can get these coins to trade in for items, which can help you out in the actual cat tower. And I'm reading all this, and I'm like, why does this have to be so complicated? And why are we getting a game so complicated when I know the outcome is very easy, right? They're going to win, they're going to acquire an item, and then they're going to use it for bomb or for someone else, etc., etc. Do you feel like this current game is a little bit of a drag now, knowing as a reader that it's going to slow down the overall pace of the Cat Tower arc?
Yeah. So I feel like with the games, it's a kind of interesting, right? Because I think when the series started, that was one of the things that it was touted for, right? That was definitely a definitive pro in its column, is that it's like, oh wow, look at these creative games that they display. Look at the way that SAU uses these games to sort of tell you more about these characters and show off their skills that aren't necessarily all about combat. But I think that was sort of a necessity of the story at that point in time, because at that point in time, we were dealing with characters who, by all intents and purposes, were pretty weak, right? If we're talking about just a straight up fight, they really couldn't take on anybody in a one-on-one, hand-to-hand fight. Now, though, I think it's interesting that as the story's progressed and our main players have gotten much more stronger and are much more capable, and not to say that they could take on anybody that they've met, but that they can actually have a one-on-one fight with certain people, that these games come back into play. And they are the way they are, and people, they're not around as frequently as they used to be. And people's response is like, oh man, I wish we could go back to some of those games. I miss the way that, SIU used to write the games into the story. And one of my first thoughts is always like, I don't really know about that though, because I think what you end up with is exactly the situation we have here, where, okay, we have this game implemented, and I kind of actually felt this way about The Cage, way back, I think it was 2 arcs ago, where you implement these games, but because of the stage that the characters are at, just in terms of their power level and stuff, and because of the current stakes, the rules of this game aren't really that set in stone, right? There is nothing that says here that anybody has to follow these rules 100% to a T, and I'm not convinced that anybody here or everybody here would follow these rules to a T, because if they have the power to sort of like wiggle outside of the rules of this game, in my mind, I'm like, they're gonna do it. Why wouldn't they do that, right? If the rule states that, like, oh, you can't go X amount of space, let's just making sort of an arbitrary thing here, like if you can't go X amount of spaces or something as long as this person is on the field, it's like, okay, well, if I know I'm stronger than this person, what if I just kill them? Then I can go, you know what I mean? And it's like I get to this place in my mind, at least, where I'm like, the games kind of lose a little bit of their weight to me, because they now just stand out a little bit more as a way to, like you said, slow down the plot and sort of divvy up the pacing, instead of a way to really test the characters and really display any sort of individual or unique traits about them, right? Like, I would argue one of the only things you really learn from this game that we've been playing is that Yasratcha is, and I guess you could say white, are scums. Like, they're pieces of shit. But, like, that's not new information. That's not something we didn't know before this game started. And so, sure, you could do whatever it is you want to highlight that point and hammer it home. But again, I would even argue just bringing up the backstories of, like, his feline, his lieutenants drives that point home. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I feel like with the games, personally, lately, I've been a little underwhelmed, because I feel like it just gets a lot harder to justify. Like, back at the beginning, when the ranker, let's take the hide and seek game, right? You needed that had to be the way to resolve this conflict. That had to be the way to test these characters, because they couldn't just take Quant in a one-on-one fight, right? There's no way in anybody's universe that they were going to beat Quant in a one-on-one fight. So the game was an excellent alternative to that. It was a way to also test these characters, but you could literally skirt around the fact that it's like, well, yeah, they can't beat them in a one-on-one fight, but that's not the point here. We're testing them, mentally. We're testing their teamwork. We're testing their, strategy capacity and all that stuff. Now it's like these games are still supposed to do that, but the rules will change so frequently because of just, again, where these characters are at power level wise and where the plot is, that, like, yeah, I don't know. They just seem like ways to, sort of drag the plot out whenever I guess SIU feels like, the main story, so to speak, is moving a little bit too quickly. But that's my thoughts.
That answer was so spectacular that I almost just want to cut and edit your answer and make that my own YouTube video, Are Games Worth in Tower of God? Holy cow, man. You said that so eloquently, in a way that I just agreed, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's not that I hate the games. It's just that the games were intrinsically, prior seasons, were so advantageous, or a way for us to see our characters that we were following, whether it's Hatz or Ship, right, face off against Quant, because we know they can't beat him in a one-on-one. So these games are showing us what these characters can do, you know, what are they all about, and how they ultimately lead towards the next floor, right? Which now, what games are involved with that, etc., right? A better example is when Bomb faced off against Jahad. And,
yes.
Okay, he's the final boss, but there's also a game that they have to be played. So not only is Bomb fighting for his life against this top tier dude, right? He's also trying to figure out how to win the game to you know, advance to the next floor, or else they're screwed, right? I feel like, you know, but that was also gauging us, the audience, where his power level was at too. So now he's also getting this growth as a character, this growth in strength, etc. It's a little hard for these games to hold weight when, you know, now let's go back to the 500th chapter, where I look at Kaiser and I'm like, well, Kaiser's a top tier person, right? Like, I know she's not like ranker strength, but you know, she was the boss of her own floor. Hockney is also respectably strong, and now you have Rock, who now we know is he is a descendant of the native one or whatever, right? Or like, you know, he has that power within him. So when I see this big bad crab man where he's like, I'm the king of the seas, it's like, but dude, but you were also captured by Yasratcha, and being the king of the sea probably is nowhere near as impressive as Kaiser from the hidden floor, right? So like, I don't care, right? Like that's the problem. There's no stakes for this game for me, because one, there's so many other things I'm trying to learn about, and even if this game is as fascinating and can probably quickly be resolved in like 8 chapter, the fact that SIU went out of his way to give it so many rules and love, like he did with all the stuff in the Hell Train, I see what he's doing. But you're right, I think we've grown past that now, and it just eating up the plot, you know.
I think I definitely agree that it becomes, when you make it that complex and when you sort of give it that level of attention, but the stakes of the where the characters are at and the story have changed, you kind of have to like accommodate for that, I feel, and either lightening up the load of the game, where it's you could have it be a present factor in maybe helping some of the characters, but it doesn't necessarily overall, you know, have to dictate the code. Like this game with the fish specifically, I think exists mainly because the way the plot is set up with this game, the current game with the battlefield and stuff, has pitted characters against people that they 100% cannot beat in a straight up fight, right? That's why this game, which literally exists to provide buffs and random, you know, assist in the middle of battle, exists. It literally, I think, exists so that Khun can help Bam get out of a confrontation with White, or you know, Khun and Hockney can help Yama and Doom get out of a confrontation with Yasratcha, who for all intents and purposes it doesn't look like they could take on in a one-on-one fight. So rather, and you know, I don't think, you know, at least in my personal opinion, that SIU is going to kill off Yama here. So, you know, putting yourself in that position where it's like, all right, I'm not going to kill off Yama, but he is also in this fight with somebody that he clearly can't win. How do I get him out of this? Got it. A game, and this game will provide the literal, you know, exit door, so to speak, right? The exit strategy for said characters, which like that's how I end up seeing it, right? Instead of, oh, it's cool that this game is here because it's showing me how, aside from being a strong fighter, how, you know, I don't know, capable Yama is of doing X, Y, or Z thing, or, oh, what a dope way to display how Hockney is able to do X, Y, and Z. And to be fair, the strategy that they give, you know, with like the giant crab being able to just kill all the fish, but Hockney's eyes coming in is pretty cool. But that's sort of, I feel like now at the expense of like, oh, that Hockney thing is cool. But overall, again, I can't help but feel like the game is a little bit just dragging in purpose, personally.
This is something you were mentioning when I was saying, you know, are the games really worth it now? Is that, man, I see Hatz pouring his heart out, struggling to keep up with the power levels. Hatz is, the thing with Hatz is that the relevant of his character, I want to see more of him. But the problem is the story went 0 to 100 with SIU giving us like top tier villains, I can't be angry at Hatz that he's so weak compared to everyone else. It's like, and I said this on my reaction, it's that, you know what Hatz is? Hatz is when you're playing like World of Warcraft or like an RPG game, and you got the best of the best items at level 30. You got your level 30 sword, you got your level 30 armor, and you know what's the problem with Hatz? Hatz is being thrown in a situation where he has the best of the best into the final boss, where he's facing off against level 80 mini bosses. It's like, dude, it's not that I don't believe Hatz can do it. It's just that he is struggling so much more when he doesn't have to. And I think it's the shame that SIU is putting characters like him and Ship in these unwinnable situations, right? And it kind of dilutes their character a bit.
But I will say, I do think that it's interesting with, again, you know, because we were talking about the test being interesting ways to show off character, other stats, so to speak, of characters that aren't necessarily their pure battle strength or their numbers. Having characters like, I'll say specifically Isu, right? Because Hatz is a little bit more of like just a straight confrontation guy. He doesn't really have a lot of the strategy or the big brain play, so to speak. Having those characters sort of come in with assist and display their abilities to overall help a character win who might not have won on their own is an interesting idea, and I do think that works. But I do think also that it becomes this thing of like, if they have to have those moments every single time they're in an altercation, I don't know, in my mind it begs the question of like, should this character be here, or B, how much longer can this character realistically last being up here? Because I've had this conversation, you know, on our channel, the AOA show, with Ian several times, where some of these characters, dude, I gotta be honest, and not so much like, I mean, I don't know, I feel a little bit this way with people like Isu and Hatz a little bit, but more so with some of the like real like straight up side characters, like we met like random people from Fug and stuff, right? Michael specifically, somebody who comes to mind, the you know, the guy with the white hair and carries a giant freaking syringe. Some of these characters, dude, I just don't buy that they got as far as, or as high up in the tower as they are, you know. And like, I know that the tower, they make it a point to be like, oh well, so, you know, luck is a big component of it, or like if you know the right people, you know, like connections, like you can kind of get carried up the tower. But I just feel like at some point, and this, you know, I don't mean to jump around a lot here, but like there's you know, the whole contention with I believe Chang is his name, right? So back in the cage, one of the regulars that we're with that we find out is a canine person who ends up just getting killed, like literally in the blink of an eye by a ranker. And it's done, you know, from what we gathered from SIU in the blog post, purely to display what a typical interaction looks like between an actual regular and a ranker. Like that's what the gap in power is supposed to be. I find it hard to believe that some of these other regulars that we know who are side characters are still kicking, bro, and just still here when it's like, dude, how have you not gotten snapped off by some ranker that you looked at the wrong way? Like these ranker, from what we know, these rankers, like they're not nice typically. They're, you know what I mean? Like to get to the position of ranker, you have to climb the tower, you have to go through a lot of shit. And so I don't know, I do find it like kind of, it makes me worried, let's just say, that the farther people like Isu and Hatz get, that their roles become so irrelevant that they just become like side fodder for Bam and Khun and whoever to like bounce off of, and it's like, oh, look at our friends that like we dragged up the tower with us. Or it makes me think that at some point, quite frankly, they're going to stop becoming relevant. SIU's going to like notice that and then find a way to like have them exit stage left. You know what I mean?
I would argue we're actually already getting that. You know, when you were talking, what immediately came to mind is, you know what Hatz and Ship remind me of right now? Tien and Yamcha, right? It's like the Dragon Ball Z fighters were all relevant. Dude, they were all relevant in the beginning, right? And what happened as Dragon Ball Z progressed, right? It's slowly, or even I would argue to Dragon Ball Super now, whether or not you read the manga or the anime. It's, you know what Dragon Ball Super is? It's the Goku and Vegeta show.
Yeah.
And everyone else is just like, well, they're there, but do you think if we saw some big Dragon Ball Z antagonist came, the face off against Krillin, like Krillin is gonna hold his own, right? Like, and if he did, I would say no. Now, as the audience, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief there, where I'm like, I don't buy this. And then eventually now Dragon Ball as a series is more hurt. So if we bring it back to Tower of God, my thing is, you know, I felt like SIU already had to make me believe that Khun and Rock specifically can keep up with Bomb by giving them these buffs, right? Like, it's crazy to me that we were in the middle of the hidden floor or something where we just now learned that Rock is a descendant of the native one, right? Like, and even if I believe that, it's like, oh, that's the thing SIU has to tell me so Rock can stay relevant in regards to like power strain, right? Because if Rock is facing off against someone who I think is clearly outmatched, let's just say a regular ranker, you know, oh, him struggling to now unleash that tapped Gohan potential is how he can like combat it, right? And it's like, so now it's sort of believable. The same thing with Khun. It's like, well, Khun's already a part of the 10 family members, which I think was already a good enough a buff, right? But now let's give him this ability with the flaming fish to now add something else to his arsenal, right? Like, I believe Bomb being an irregular and why he as the protagonist can deal with these rankers, even though he's like a C rank regular, right, on the 50th floor and whatever you want to gauge that as a power level. But okay, those are the excuses for those three, right? But what about Anak, or as you said, Chang, right? Because Chang, he died, and Chang was around with us for a long time, and Chang was again respectable in his power, but he's clearly outmatched against these bigger fish in the ocean, right? So it's that's what worries me a lot with Tower of God, is that how relevant are these characters going to remain? Because by the time we're done with Tower of God, or once we're done with this arc specifically, I mean, how do you make Anak sound interesting to me again when I just saw some crazy shit go down with Kallavan, Yasratcha, and we'll probably see the head family member of the Lopobia family, right? Yeah. So if we're gonna see a main guy from a top 10 family, right, and they're regarded as, you know, the most powerful people in the world, how is Anak or Endorsi going to even be relevant for me, or why would I even care what they do after this, you know? And that's what I'm a little trepidatious about. So, which, you know what, I think that can just actually, that can lead into the Cat Tower itself. There's a lot of stuff happening in the Cat Tower, right? We see Kallavan trying to face off against Lyborick, right? We see Yama facing off against Yasratcha. We see Bomb facing off against White. Bomb staying back to face off against White, I think, is probably one of the dumbest decisions I've seen his character do. Because I think there's a character regression happening. And I know a lot of people would look at that and be like, well, DJ Miles, like, he's always been this frightful kid acting out of emotions, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, that was the excuse when we saw him as dual Viola Grace, right? Like, I believed he was still a kid at heart. And I know he's still a kid at heart now. But he's seen so much shit within the Hell Train, within this suicide mission of the Cat Tower of like, listen, everyone is here to save Jinsung Ha, but they all have their own personal vendettas that they want to do, but they wouldn't have done it if collectively they couldn't act as a team. So for Bomb to go to selfishly face off against White, despite the Arc Raptor and Prince reveal, I'm thinking to myself, dude, but don't you know that White, even if he is telling the truth, which I believe, like, you should know he's provoking you. And the bigger thing that we learned with, you know, taking the 2 steps and all this stuff, if Bomb takes even one misstep, he cannot save Jinsung Ha. So what makes you think, after me, the audience, saw you struggle with White in those 10 minutes, thinks that you can beat him the second time around, now that, like, you're gonna have this hidden Gohan I'm angry potential, right? Like, is Bomb doing the right thing here? Like, is it warranted that I should feel frustrated with this character?
I definitely do think that Bomb is being selfish. It's funny because when Ian and I, you know, the other guy I do the AOA show with at the time of recording this, actually just did a stream to the last 3 chapters yesterday, and so that stuff's actually pretty fresh in my mind. And when we read it, I was actually a little bit. I was more frustrated with the idea, because, you know, I say idea because none of this has been confirmed. It is all speculation that Bam's friends had lied to him about about the whole reveal concerning Prince and Art Raptor. And I was like, oh, well, how could they keep doing that to him? It's like, it kind of always is just reinforcing that they don't really trust him, this and this. And like I said, it is a theory. It hasn't been in the text confirmed. It's just something that could have happened. But I do got to say, the more I've been thinking about it, even over this past 24 hours, I am now kind of in the camp of like, Bam, at least at this moment right now, it really doesn't matter. Or I should say it can't matter. Because quite frankly, the stakes are higher than they've ever been for you and all the people who risk their lives to sign up with you to fight this fight. We've basically started a war, an actual war with Jahad and his army. There are so many other things that fall as a consequence if you die here than just you not being able to rescue Jinsung. So many other people's lives will be literally taken or ruined if you fail, if you don't make it out of this. So you have to make, like, that is priority number one. And in order to save those lives of the people who are still alive now, who are fighting for their lives and fighting for your life against Jahad, yeah, I do kind of think that it's definitely selfish of him to, again, if he does, the way the chapter leaves it off is like he's moping about it now, but we haven't seen his definitive stance, I guess. So he could, next chapter, he could ultimately or reluctantly, whatever, pick up and decide to leave. But if he were to stay, yeah, I do think it's a very selfish thing, but I guess more importantly, the mindset he's in, right? Because even if he does decide to leave, I kind of have a feeling that Arya, the chick he's with, would be the reason that he decides to leave, or some other, thought or whatever that comes up in his mind. It won't be his choice, I guess. And that's my point, is when I initially read those chapters, my first thought was like, oh, well, I kind of get why Bam's this upset. I mean, his friends do keep lying to him like this. But now, to be honest, the more I'm thinking about it, man, the more I'm like, if his friends did lie to him because they were afraid he'd act like this, him acting like this does kind of prove them right? Like it makes sense. Like, it's a shitty thing to do, obviously, to lie to your friends. But again, the stakes, we're not like going out for like Sunday dinner and it's like, oh, if he finds out about this truth, it'll make dinner awkward. We're in a war. People's lives are like, the stakes are higher than they've ever been. If we have to lie to keep Bam from going off the casket because we know he will, and then Bam proceeds to do that exact thing, it's like, I find it kind of hard, man, to come to your defense. Because if Bam had found that out and displayed some level of, maturity, and I'm not saying Bam has to be like all grown up all of a sudden and be the most, emotionally mature human being or irregular, whatever, that's ever existed in the tower. But if Bam had found that out and sort of internalized it and really racked his brain around what needs to happen, where he needs to be right now, and proved his friends wrong, proved that maybe he could have taken that news in and compartmentalized it even, and then when the time, persists or allows itself, then he kind of like goes at his friends like, yo, by the way, or whatever. Then it's like, oh, okay, see, guys, ultimately, though, you were wrong, right? We do have proof now that Bam has displayed some level of emotional growth and can handle this. But I do find it hard with the way he's come back into this, where I'm like, Bam, you are kind of doing exactly what they didn't want you to do.
Dude, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. Is that, because my thing was like, okay, White reveals what he did. If I was Bomb, I would be like, you know what, that pissed me off, but I gotta hold that in the memory bank. Like, don't worry. Now I'm for sure gonna kill you. I'll come back to you, but I gotta do this first, right? Yeah. And hold that. And then once everything is said and done, and they escape or whatever, and I said this in my reactions, I cannot wait for that confrontation.
Oh, yeah.
When Khun is going to act like, oh, man, Bomb, like, great job. And he hugs him right from, the outcome of this cat tower. And instead of Bomb, like, hugging him, he just straight up sucker punch him and be like, you lied to me and we got a problem, right? Yeah. And I would love to see that deviate into like him doing his own thing, and then we focus on our season 1 veterans, right, wherever the story goes. But it's and then, as you said, wow, that was so great what you said, where he just like, see, I didn't attack White, and I didn't listen to him provoking me. I did what I had to do, but now I'm like more embarrassed that like you guys couldn't trust me, right? But instead, he's backpedaling and he's acting like this brash kid. And it's one thing if you're on the 52nd floor and you're casually climbing the tower with Jahad not eyeing you, but Jahad is eyeing you. There's actually a war happening now, some civil strife within the 10 families, because of your association of who you are, and you're still going to say, you know what, I got to get my revenge right now. That is so absolutely selfish and so ass backwards to me. And I understand he came from a place where he was living in a rock with Rachel and blah, blah, blah. And he's still the scared kid. But guess what? We all are, right? Yeah. So it's either you nut up and shut up, or now you're going to selfishly do this at the expense of now everyone, in this war. Even if there's selfishly fighting for their own desires, collectively they can't do it without one another, right? Yeah, like whatever Kallavan does with Lyborick, no way Kallavan was going to face off an entire army by himself.
It's very like people, because I'm sure some people be like, oh well, you guys are being pretty hard on Bam, and it's like, how, because they'll be like, well, how can you expect Bam to have that level of growth? And I have to be honest, dude, as the main protagonist, that is what I expect from him. If I need a reason to get behind this kid and follow him, let's put it this way, if I was in this war and this was our main guy, this was our front runner, this was the guy I had to get behind, I need a reason to get behind him other than he's really stupid fucking strong. And one of the reasons that I would get behind him is seeing that level of emotional maturity. And I'm not saying that he has to have that moment now and then maintain it throughout, there can't be ups and downs, but if he's gone this far in and displayed no sign of emotional maturity or no sign of leveling up, his circumstances be what they were, quite frankly, they're not that anymore, right? And he's not in a situation where he can let that be a factor anymore. I expect that much of him. I expect him to be able to understand what's at stake here. He's, make no mistake, all these other people that are next to him got in this fight with him, but he started this war. This war is on his name. He even has this moment when they approach the first gate or the first wall, or whatever it is, where he's kind of reconciling with that, right? He's like, look at all these people who are fighting and dying. This is all because of me. I started this. And, you could argue the semantics of like who started the war, but the point is Bam is at the front runner of the opposing side here. He's the one that Jahad literally has a death warrant out for. He's the one that Jahad literally told all his forces to go kill. He's the reason that all these people are fighting, for the most part. And so if I was on this side, I'd be like, Bam, why are we following? What is it about you? Don't tell me it's just you're an irregular, because we're kind of fucked if that's the only reason these people are staking their lives on you, So I, not to be, not just for being hard on him, but I do kind of expect that level of maturity from him, or growth, I should say.
I couldn't have said it better myself. We can go on about that, but let's go ahead and segue into something a little bit different now with the Bomb and White specifically. So, White out of nowhere approaching Bomb with this, to me, is what I feel like SIU couldn't have waved that red flag any more higher than he could. White will make it out alive by the end of this arc. This confrontation, because if we were so gun-ho on Bomb saving Jinsung Ha, SIU literally could have placed White somewhere else, right? Maybe with Kallavan, or maybe with Khun again, or whatever. No, it's just very convenient to me that White now wants the person he wants the most, or wants to devour, Bomb. And now this confrontation is happening with Bomb selfishly saying, even if we put plot for the sake of it, to now that they are having this, I would argue, final battle, right? So my question to you is, do you think White will be alive at the end of this arc, or do you think he's going to die?
Oh man, I gotta be honest. I actually, I will say personally, if I was just going off of my intuition here, I could see a world. I could see White dying in this arc, but I kind of hope he doesn't, because I'm in the camp of what I believe to be the minority. Maybe it's more 50-50. I don't know. That I actually like White's character. I like him a lot as a character. I think in terms of the villains of this story, he's actually one of the more, interesting characters, I'll say, because I think people are, will just sort of jump on the wagon of like, oh, well, he's a crazy killer. Like, why show him any sign of sympathy or thought or whatever? And I don't know. I think that, first off, any of these characters that are part of the 10 grade families that have those people as their role models or parental figures deserve as much slack as you can give them, because those people, for all intents and purposes, aren't fit to be people, let alone parents, and shouldn't be in charge of raising and sculpting young minds, but they do. And they're like, everything White knows in terms of perceptions and reality comes from his father, who, for all intents and purposes, is an absolute piece of shit, like just a total piece of garbage. And so I like this idea of seeing White, of seeing more of that in White, the desperation, the insecurity, the inferiority complex, all coming to display with this confrontation with Bam. So I do like the idea that this is coming out of Bam, or that this is coming out now rather, because we get to see, you know, so far all we've seen is the pompous, arrogant, you know, flamboyant, presumptuous White, right? We've seen him at his best, his most, you know, like, you know, I'm White and I'm the shit. Seeing these other sides of him where he's a little bit, where we're seeing how petty he can get, we're seeing how desperate he is, we're seeing how angry, how hurt, how hungry he is. I would be lying if I said like it didn't matter to me, or I don't think it's important, because I do. I think especially for these villains, it's important to give them as much, you know, complexity, or even if you want to just argue room as a character, give them more space, give them more, you know, time to sort of like air themselves out and see all the different complex layers to them. But I do, so I think for that reason alone, that's why I'd want him to live, because I kind of want to see that character go a little bit more places, like whether that's up or down, to be honest, whether he ends up like backpedaling and getting even more desperate and you know, hungry and, you know, angry and devolves, or, you know, I don't know, maybe he ends up in this like weird anti-hero state where he kind of has to reconcile with like what any of this stuff means, just because there's been a lot of moments, or not a lot, there's been enough moments, I'll say, of White challenging people's views on what they, you know, who they are, what they want, and why they want it. And the most infamous one that comes to my mind is his conversation with Hatz way back in the Wall arc. And he, you know, Hatz is like, I kind of hate this guy's guts, but like as a swordsman, I can't lie, like this dude's the shit. He's the best of the best. And White has this, you know, more or less, if you really want to be as good as me, then like drop the morals. Like you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get like this body count. Like you need to have blood on your hands. That's what it means to be a swordsman. But I think that's what his father taught him, right? That's all he knows, because that's all the info and all the teachings he would have gotten. So I like this idea of White trying to reaffirm these beliefs in other people so that he can then justify them in himself, right? If I tell Hatz this is how he has to be as a swordsman, and then he does that, that means that I'm in the right. That means that I wasn't wrong. That means that everything that I've done and all the horrible things I've done, there's justification, there's purpose to it. Same thing with Bam. That's why he wants to see Bam get corrupted so bad, because he needs it justified that all the decisions he's made are still right, that everything he's done is the appropriate way to respond to the trauma he has. But so I actually think there'd be something interesting with White maybe grappling with that trauma and like really figuring out why he feels that way and who's the real enemy here. But like that all aside, that's just more me personally. I could see White sort of coming to a, you know, an ultimate head here, so to speak, with Bam or somebody, and not making it out of this arc alive as a result of sort of like giving into that desperation a little bit, maybe too early or too hard, or whatever you want to call it.
That Hatz thing is so fascinating, and I think if we saw more further examples with White maybe saying this to Bam about like, you know, becoming corrupt to become stronger like me, blah blah blah, maybe at the beginning of this arc, and then White doing something else, I would have been like, yeah, you know what, I would love to see White's character or his struggles with his belief be further explored. But because I think they're putting White against Bam in this situation right now is why I think he just might end up dying. And even if I personally would want to see that further explored, I think now the main test, because Bam is our protagonist and saying like, no, you got to become corrupt to become like me. And I know this doesn't definitively like makes it so White is going to die, but when we started this hiatus, or when we got the return of Tower of God with the feline commanders and their backstories and how they end up ultimately dying, you know, and it's an anime trope too. You see a character's backstory, they're going to die. And we've seen White's backstory several times, so many times. But I feel like for SIU to throw it again at us, and then for SIU to even conveniently have Arya, who can go back in time with her abilities, right? Of like something happening here of like White and Bam and all this feud. I feel like there now has to be a confrontation about the battle of beliefs, right? And one has to come out on top now, right? Because now that gives Bam an ultimate character growth. Because here's the thing I would love to see. Whether or not Bam becomes corrupt, I don't know. But if Bam ultimately became corrupt to kill White, for White to die, but for White to have the last laugh because of it, I would be like, whoa, you know, like, so White was always right, you know, like that would be some like crazy deep shit. I don't know, you know, but I feel like they put White in this precarious situation where, man, I would have loved to have seen his character progress some more, but I would also argue at the same time, where else can his character go now, right? Like, I would love to see him maybe approach his father inevitably at the end, but that means he's going to have to stay with the characters for a long time, or, you know, he somehow escapes this situation and then does his own thing, and then, you know, we'll like hear from him like time to time, kind of like Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. It's like, oh, like he's still there because he's just a well-liked character, and I want to know what he's doing, right? But I feel like him pinning Bomb against this battle of beliefs has to have some sort of resolution, especially if Bomb is now saying, I have to stay and fight
That's
him,
true.
as opposed to doing the thing that we were talking about earlier with him, right? So, yeah. But that's just my 2 cents on it. Speaking of which, within the cat tower, with White being up in the air with his whether or not he'll be alive, do you think Jinsung Ha is going to die by the end of this arc?
I actually don't think he's going to die, but at least in this arc. But I gotta be honest, I kind of wish he would. And actually, if I'm being 100% honest, I kind of wish he died back in the last station. Because you know, this is something that we've touched on a little bit on the AOA show with Ian. I feel like that was it, man. If you were to give him a penultimate send-off, the way that season 2 like treated him like he was dying, or that he had died, like that was it. I cried, I grieved, like I had my moment. I love Jinsung as a character. That like touching send-off of like the way he's always cared about his students, you know, Karaka and Bam, and like that was it for me. That was peak. That was like, if you had to send him off, that was it. Now, you know, you could make the argument that maybe SIU might invent some other moment later down the line that might actually be an even cooler or better or more emotionally resonant way to send him off. But the problem is, up until that happens, it just kind of feels like pandering. It kind of feels like, because I'm like, why? Because now I feel like I've already had that moment, and so him being alive, it just feels like he's a piece on the chessboard. He's just a puzzle in the game now, and his role as a character, his role as a mentor or whatever, is kind of over, and he's now just a stake in the game. It's now like, oh well, you like Jinsung, Bam, so like he's alive here, come over, like now you have to come here and save him, instead of like Jinsung playing a role as a character in the story. You know what I mean?
I agree. So, of course, I want all my good protagonists, or, you know, the protagonist friends to all make it out and honky-dory and they live happily ever after. But, you know, this isn't Fairy Tail. This is Tower of God, you know? And you're right. I didn't even think about that send-off back at the, you know, at the end of season 2, because that also would have further made Kallavan just this guy that Bomb has to defeat now, right? Like, if Kallavan actually successfully defeated Jinsung Ha one-on-one without Maschenny interfering, yeah, now it's like Bomb lost his master, and now we got a new target, because we all know Jahad is like the eye of the prize of like the final villain. But, you know, structurally, I would love to see, you know, Bomb always again climb that ladder slowly but surely, and Kallavan now being at that forefront. It seems like Kallavan has deviated because, again, now I guess White is the focus and whatever else is happening within the cat tower itself. But I would still love for Bomb to fail this mission, and maybe he's actually going to fail as a result of him not growing as a character, staying back to fight White, right? So maybe as a result of that, you know, he can't save Jinsung Ha at the nick of time or whatever, or maybe even Jinsung Ha like having that Whitebeard One Piece moment where like he stays behind while like everyone is like leaving, and that's how Jinsung Ha eventually dies, right? Like Jinsung Ha's like, oh, Bomb, thanks for coming to save me.
Exactly.
Like, they did save him, but Jinsung Ha still has to die, because now,
that sounds
again,
pretty
maybe
solid, actually.
The leader of
even
the
as I'm
local
hearing you say it, I'm like, that's probably what's gonna happen.
Right? Like, dude, this is the Marineford arc, right? Like, dude, that's exactly what's happening. It's like, oh, they technically saved him, but because now shit with the Lopobia family head approaches him, or even Jahad himself, to be like, all right, man, these motherfuckers can't do shit. I gotta do shit. Okay, right? And then, of course, they all escape, but then it's like, but Jinsung Ha now has to die, right? Because we know how powerful Jinsung Ha is. And I think that's what makes it more, it adds more stakes to the story, because are you telling me this ultimate suicide mission is going to end with all of them just like coming away unscathed? Like, sure, we lost who's the Rem and Ram girl,
Oh, yeah,
Nola
yeah,
and Sola,
yeah.
right? Like, okay, one of them, yeah, like one of them died, but like, did I even care about them
Yeah,
anyway?
like we kind of
Like,
just met them this
sure,
arc. Like we
right?
haven't
Like,
really had, you know, as much emotional. But like if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I agree that like somebody we know,
I
somebody
need
we
the
know
emotional
should die.
stakes. Yeah. We need the emotional stakes. Do I think Khun is going to die? Absolutely not. But like, you know, if we lost, and I said this in my prediction video a long time ago, I think Mule Love has to die because it's just like, okay, he's there as someone like I care about, but not really care about,
no.
you know, and that's the perfect character that can die.
I mean, I definitely
result of it.
agree
Like-
just in terms of story point, but I love Mule. That would suck. I totally get what you're
Right,
saying
like,
though. Like it
yeah.
does, you know, it's like somebody like just the fact that I'm saying that I guess proves the emotional attachment point, but it's like, you know, it's like, oh, Mule though. Like what? Oh man.
Yeah. It's like someone you care about, but not enough to like, you know, throw your pitchforks up in the air, right? Like, okay, so Mule Love has to die. I mean, we already lost one of the ReZero girls, right? And then, but if the heart was like, damn, Jinsung Ha died, and why did he die? As a result of Bomb still acting like a selfish brat against the white confrontation single-handedly, right? Like that's how I would love for it to be like, damn, Bomb, see, you still got to grow up. And now I would love to assume, hopefully, at whatever happened within the Cat Tower, now Bomb has to be like, okay, you know what? Now I have to separate.
You know
myself
what?
from
That's
Khun and Rock,
that's
'cause I
really interesting.
have
I
a lot
like
growing
that
up to do.
this idea you had because I was thinking before. I'm like, oh, I actually don't know if Bam is going to confront White because I'm like, if he does, there obviously needs to be a consequence to that. But then I'm thinking, I'm like, what consequence could there be that's vital enough to like shake Bam's head and really make him realize that like he needs to grow up? I really like everything you said. I really like that idea of yours that like the person that could be the consequence is the literal very person he came here to save, and like it throws the whole mission and his perspective on it in whack of like, bam, every time you have one of those moments, every time you act on one of those impulses, somebody could die. And like you know, having it be Jinsung, I actually really like that. I really like that.
Let me go ahead and ask, because now let's just end it on a super light note. Tower of God, best girl. Who's number one? I mean, you can tell me your top three, but who's number one? You're okay. You know, I won't. I'm not going to fight you on that. I'm just going to say, do you want a girl who's going to constantly bicker and fight with you?
Well, there
all
wouldn't
the
be much
time?
fighting because
That's
she'd
all
get
I'm
whatever
gonna
she
say.
wants.
She's a hottie.
I don't see much bickering in our future. She's like, I
Wow.
want to, yeah, cool, let's do it.
Look, the girl I'm gonna wipe down, who I'm gonna have a healthy relationship, unlike you, has to be Elaine.
Look, man,
It's going to be Kaiser.
that, if you want that vanilla
be Kaiser,
sauce,
man.
that is totally fine. You want to sit out on the porch, drinking your lemonade, that's cool. You know, some of us just want a little more excitement. That's all I'm saying. So most.
Okay. Hey, you'll get a lot of excitement with Yuri. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, don't worry. Jeez. Yeah. Goddamn. All right. Well, on that note, I think that's a good way to stamp our seal of approval with Chapter 500. I felt like this was maybe a little bit more critical, but I say this out of sincerity because, one, I love SIU. I hope his health just recovers, you know, at the end of the day. And I hope we get an ending to this story because I love this story despite my criticisms with it. And
I think
I love
like
this community
you know,
too.
to jump in, but like no story is perfect, right? Every story is gonna have its flaws or its low points or whatever you want to call them. I don't think like we sat here and did this because we hate the story. We did this because we love the story and we want to, you know, we'd like to see those problems addressed. But it's not like we're just we're passionate enough about the story to have this conversation. This was definitely a more critical conversation, but it was in the hopes of bringing these up and talking about them with the community. Because I think, to be honest, I think it does a disservice if you look at this story and just try to justify every single thing that happens in it, and don't call attention to some of the things that are like, why did that happen that way, or like why would this go this way, or this, you know, whatever. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, since you are the guest, do you want to give you know, your social media plugs, your shout
sure,
out?
yeah.
Your
So you could follow me personally at IzzyXPK on Twitter. Despite my common sense telling me not to, I am on Twitter pretty often. And you can follow the AOA Show on Twitter. That's at the AOA Show. We are also on Instagram. Basically all of the social medias, everything from Twitter to TikTok, under the AOA Show. Also YouTube, the AOA Show channel, and we also have a second YouTube channel, AOA Reacts. where we do that exact thing. We react to a lot of, anime shows, trailers, what have you, games, all that kind of stuff. So feel free to check us out.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully next time we talk, I can grab the other two guys if possible. But yeah, it was a treat having you on, man. So thank you.